Yesterday, February 26th, was a very exciting day in the cybersecurity world because the highly anticipated NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 was officially published. For all of the cybersecurity geeks like myself, we were very excited to get our hands on the latest and greatest hot off the presses cybersecurity framework. It's been over 10 years, well over a decade since NIST has updated the cybersecurity framework. Now, to give you some context in terms of why this is such a landmark update, NIST puts out a lot of special publications and various frameworks that federal agencies are required to follow. However, state agencies and private sectors are not required to follow NIST publications. The NIST cybersecurity framework is so popular that it's widely adopted internationally. There are organizations all around the world that have adopted the NIST cybersecurity framework to help them manage their cybersecurity risks, from small organizations, large organizations, and everything in between. That's just how popular this cybersecurity framework is, because the cybersecurity framework does a really good job of providing these cybersecurity outcomes in just plain English. Any organization, regardless of their size or resources, can pick and choose which outcomes they want to adopt in order to manage their cybersecurity risks. In this video, I'm going to give you a high-level overview of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 and the supplemental materials, walking you through the materials, how you can leverage those materials in your organization. In future videos, I'm going to do more of a deep dive into the actual framework itself and the various supplemental materials. So I won't keep you waiting any longer. Let's jump into it. All right, so if you go to nist.gov/cyber framework, it'll take you to essentially the home page for the NIST cybersecurity framework. Big update for this 2.0 version is everything's digital now. First place we want to go to is the actual framework itself. Let's take a look at the document. Now, the first thing you'll notice is with the previous version of the cybersecurity framework 1.1, it had 5 core functions. So we had recovery, identify, protect, and detect. But now with 2.0, NIST has incorporated the govern function, which is governance, the policies, your procedures, your administrative controls, ultimately the strategic direction coming from senior leadership, which impacts the other core functions. So I'm really happy to see that NIST did incorporate governance into the NIST cybersecurity framework, because in order for a framework to be sustainable in an organization, you certainly have to have that governance component. They kept the wheel, but they thought of a clever way of incorporating the governance into the wheel. So this illustration gives you a good understanding of the cybersecurity framework core. I mentioned you have the 6 core functions. Again, what's new to 2.0 is the govern function that's been added. Then you have the categories and the subcategories. This is a good illustration to show how the functions, categories, and subcategories are interrelated. I'm going to briefly walk you through each of the functions. Govern, organization cybersecurity management strategy, the expectations and policy. So they have to be established, published, and communicated, and also monitored throughout the organization. And again, that's going to be the directive from senior leadership in terms of what's expected from a cybersecurity standpoint throughout the organization. Certainly need to have that governance as part of your cybersecurity program. In addition, the governance is going to help establish the cybersecurity strategy for the organization, also roles, responsibilities, and the oversight. The identify function helps the organization identify their risks and make sure that those risks are understood. A key activity as part of the identify function is organizations creating an accurate asset inventory, including their data, hardware, software, systems, facilities, services, and people. That is going to be key, because an organization can't protect assets that they don't identify. So whenever we're working with clients, that's one of the first steps we have them take, is create that asset inventory. Then from there, we're doing a network diagram, data flow diagram, so forth. Next, the organization wants to identify the controls that they're going to implement to protect those assets. They see it's important to follow that order First, you need to identify the assets. Next, you want to be able to protect the assets. And moving on to detect. Now we need to be able to detect any possible cybersecurity attacks and compromises. Detect function is going to support incident response and recovery activities, which ties into the next function, respond. It's going to be those actions regarding a detected cybersecurity incident are taken. As you see that these functions, they build on top of each other. We started out with the governance, the policies, procedures, organizational strategy, to identify our assets and the relevant cybersecurity risks of those assets. From there, we go to protect. Okay, now we need to protect those assets and prioritize the limited resources that all organizations have to protect our most critical resources. Detect any potential compromises to those critical assets, which ties into respond to any detection of malicious activity, data breach, insider threat, having the controls in place to being able to analyze, mitigate, and report. When you think about incident responses, you want to be able to minimize the impact of that cyber incident. In order to do that, you need to have processes and procedures in place, like an incident response plan, and rehearse that incident response plan prior to an incident happening so that the incident responders know how to quickly detect, respond. Next, moving on to recover function, want to ensure that the assets and operations affected by a cybersecurity incident are restored as quickly as possible before it escalates to a disaster. So part of your business continuity disaster recovery plan going to be that recovery function. Back to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework wheel that illustrates how all of these functions integrate with each other and are dependent upon each other. We have our governance in the center and the corresponding functions. One of the many reasons I believe that the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is so popular is because it breaks down cybersecurity into functions. And whenever you can break down any type of activity into bite-sized pieces, that makes it easier to implement and understand. Inspire Cyber, our mission is to make cybersecurity compliance easy, especially for small businesses. We rely heavily on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework in order to do that, because the cybersecurity framework follows such a tried and true method of breaking complex tasks down into small bite-sized pieces. I always like the metaphor of how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Same way with cybersecurity, one bite at a time. And in the context of NIST Cybersecurity Framework, one function at a time. So organization can build upon each function. And in some functions, they may have lower levels of maturity. However, they can segment those functions and prioritize which areas they want to mature that best suits the organization's risk appetite. Kudos to NIST for continuing the simplicity approach for cybersecurity, making it accessible for organizations of all sizes, especially those small businesses that really struggle with all the complexity that's typically associated with cybersecurity frameworks. Next, we're going to take a look at the organizational profile. Essentially think about the organization's current state, specifying the core outcomes the organization is currently achieving or attempting, and then a target profile, so that desired outcomes that organization has selected and prioritized. Another great feature of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is it's not a one-size-fits-all and it's not prescriptive. The senior leadership in the organization has to clearly identify what their risk appetite and tolerance is, and then they can leverage the NIST Cybersecurity Framework to help them move from their current state or current profile to their target state or target profile. An example would be if an organization wants to pursue becoming a defense contractor. And in order to become a defense contractor, they're likely going to have a DFAR 7012 clause in their contract, which will require them to implement the controls outlined in NIST SP 800-171. The current state is they're not complying with NIST 800-171. They have not implemented all those controls, but their target profile, that desired future state would be to fully implement NIST SP 800-171. That's just a practical example of how an organization can view their profile, current state versus target desired state. Also, you have the community profiles as a baseline of cybersecurity framework outcomes that's shared amongst like organizations. So for example, a community profile for manufacturing organizations that are less than 1,000 employees. You can kind of get a benchmark or baseline understanding of where your organization is in comparison to the community profiles. Good way to gauge organization's maturity level. And this does have example community profiles which we'll take a look at later, but yeah, it's on the website. This illustration just gives you an overview of how to leverage the NIST Cybersecurity Framework and in the context of the profiles. So starting off with the organization profile, doing the scoping, gathering any information you need, create the organization profile, analyzing any of those gaps. The example that I gave for becoming a defense contractor and complying with NIST SB 80171/CMMC, then you would analyze those gaps and create an action plan, something that you can execute on that will take the organization from the current profile to the target profile of full compliance, and then implement that plan of action. The next component of the cybersecurity framework, and this is new to the NIST CSF 2.0, the tiers help set the tone and how the organization is going to manage the cybersecurity risk. Tier 1, the lowest level maturity, that maybe the outcomes are partially implemented, all the way up to tier 4. In reality, a lot of organizations never get to the level of tier 4. However, it could be a goal of the organization, but it's important to understand, again, with NIST Cybersecurity Framework not being prescriptive, and how organizations can pick and choose which outcomes from the NIST Cybersecurity Framework that they want to implement. It may not make sense for your organization to reach tier 4, that adaptive level. Perhaps based on your risk appetite and risk tolerance, the tier 3 or tier 2 or even tier 1 is sufficient for your organization. That's the beauty of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, where it's up to the organization to tailor the cybersecurity framework to their needs and to their desired business outcomes. But these are just another tool that organization can use, part of the framework with the different tiers. Here we have an introduction to the online resources that supplement the cybersecurity framework, informative references, all the different mapping relationships between the various standards, guidelines, and regulations. You're going to have implementation examples. I really love the idea of NIST providing the implementation examples. It's one thing to provide a framework and say these are the desired outcomes or the best cybersecurity practices. But it's another thing to actually have implementation examples showing this is how an organization of your similar size and resources can implement the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So this is great. You also have your quick start guide where you're just taking the core elements of the framework and saying, hey, this is what you need to get started based on the type of organization. So we're going to take a closer look at all of these resources. It's vital to understand that the cybersecurity framework, the intent and overall purpose to help organizations better manage their cybersecurity risks. But a big component of that is the risk management communication. And it does provide that taxonomy of cybersecurity best practices that can be understood by all stakeholders, whether it's executives, managers, practitioners, creating that level setting and baseline and a shared language that they all can use to work towards that common goal of managing the organization's cybersecurity risks. Leveraging the cybersecurity framework, you're all on the same page and you're speaking the same language. I can't emphasize that enough, how important it is to speak the same language. And I'm sure many of you know, if you're not a technical person, how challenging it can be talking to someone who is technical and they're not making that translation from the technology to the actual business related risks. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework brings it all together into a concise, shared taxonomy. This illustration shows the interrelatedness between the cybersecurity risks and the privacy risks, so showing how they overlap, and points you to the privacy risk assessment methodology, the PRAM. So just a catalog of example problems for use in privacy risk assessments. So another supplement source that you can use that's free that can really help your organization manage your cybersecurity and privacy risks. Certainly can't forget about supply chain. We have the cybersecurity supply chain risk management practices for systems and organizations, taking an in-depth look into the cybersecurity risks. Next, we have the emerging technology. So this table gives you an overview of the categories that are part of each function. NIST does a phenomenal job with the cybersecurity framework of breaking it into bite-sized pieces and areas of focus for an organization. So think of this as an entire elephant, the whole framework, but breaking it down into, okay, let's focus on first the organizational context, then our risk management strategy, and kind of following the recommended order for corresponding to the function and category can make it a lot more manageable for organizations to implement the cybersecurity framework. If we look further, this goes into more detail related to the categories and actual outcomes for each function. For example, GVOC01, organization missions understand and inform cybersecurity risk and management. So that's the outcome. The organization can choose which of these outcomes that they actually want to adopt. They don't have to adopt all of them. It's not a prescriptive framework. Think of it as an a la carte framework. So based on your organization's risk appetite and risk tolerance, picking which of these outcomes from each function that your organization wants to implement, and factoring in your organizational profile, your current profile, your target profile. So it may not make sense to try to implement all of these. Some organizations may need to implement all of them depending on their line of work, their operations, their level of cybersecurity risk that they're facing, and other ones maybe not so much. But it's good to have those options available to you. Okay, so we took a look at the actual framework. Now let's take a look at some of the profiles. So if we click on profiles, we have the organizational profile template. So if you download the template, you'll be able to leverage that template to build out your organization's profile. We have example profiles. So let's look at the example profiles. Go to this website. We have community profiles 1.1, and you have the different types of organizations. So if we look at manufacturing, for example, gives us a look at the manufacturing profile. So it's just another resource that's available to you. Looking back at the various profiles, have a lot of different types of profiles. I know that was one of the most frequent comments that NIST received during the process of drafting the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is people wanted more examples of how to actually implement the outcomes. So certainly want to look at the various examples. Even have one for ransomware risk management. We know ransomware is a big cybersecurity threat that many organizations face in all sectors. A lot of resources. Really commend NIST for providing all of the various resources to help organizations implement the NIST Cybersecurity Framework as seamlessly as possible. Next, one of my favorite resources, the Quick Start Guides. So if we look at the Quick Start Guides, we have the various quick start guides we have for small businesses, enterprise risk management, other type of organizations. Aspire Cyber works most frequently with small businesses. So let's see what we have for the small businesses quick start guide. Once you download that quick start guide, have 9 pages of guidance, and it's also the title page. So any small business can take this small business quick start guide and just follow some of these best practices for implementing this cybersecurity framework. Now, this is a supplement to the framework. It's not intended to replace the framework. However, if organizations just want something to get started really quickly, if they currently have nothing in place from a cybersecurity program standpoint, they just want to quickly get started, then this is a great resource. So it starts you off first with the govern function and outline what's your business mission, cybersecurity risks that the organization faces, legal requirements, regulatory and contractual. It gives you examples of what questions to consider, additional resources. Next, it goes into identify. What are some things where you need to do to get started quickly? I mentioned earlier that asset inventory, areas that you should prioritize. So pretty much this quick start guide gives you the most critical areas to prioritize for a small business that's looking to implement the NIST cybersecurity framework. So I absolutely love this resource. This is something that I certainly will leverage when we're helping small businesses, and I'll point them to this guide. There's no shortage of information and guidance out there, but it can quickly become overwhelming, especially if this is not your area of expertise. But as you can see, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework really breaks it down into a shared taxonomy that anyone of any level of expertise can understand and implement these best practices. So this is phenomenal. Now, if you don't remember anything I said in this video, if you don't take anything away, make sure if you're a small business owner to download this quick start guide for small businesses, because it is a phenomenal resource. And I'm actually going to do a separate video deep diving into this small business quick start guide because I think it's just that incredible. It deserves its own separate video. All of the resources point you to additional resources, so there's no shortage of free guidance available to you provided by NIST. You have paid for this with your tax dollars, so you might as well maximize these resources. The last thing I'll cover in this overview video is the mappings of the cybersecurity framework outcomes mapped to other frameworks like NIST SP 800-53 or ISO 27001 or HIPAA. Then you'll find that information in this section for the mapping. I played with it a little bit yesterday, but I didn't quite figure it out, so I won't even fumble my way through it on this video, but I am going to play with it more and figure it out, and I'll create a separate video for that. All right, so there you have it. This was just a high-level overview of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, and this is a landmark resource that's available for free. I highly recommend small businesses, medium, large, whatever type of organization you are, wherever you're located in the world, your organization can benefit greatly from leveraging the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 to manage your cybersecurity risk. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and let me know what you think about the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it.